George and Matilda Mouse and the Moon Rocket. Beep. One moonlit night, George Mouse set off down the garden path to find something for his family supper. He was trotting towards the garbage can to see what exciting things had been thrown away that day, when suddenly he hesitated. He could smell smoke. The next moment he nearly jumped out of his skin, as terrifying noises burst from the sky. He looked up in time to see stars exploding and falling and changing color. Beep. He rushed back up the path through the ivy bush to the old doll's house, which he and his wife Matilda had made their home, and raced up the stairs. George found Matilda peering out of the bedroom window, clutching their 5 children very tightly. They were staring at a huge fire which they could see blazing behind the rock garden. "The world must be ending," whispered Matilda, keeping her voice low so that the children would not hear. Suddenly George gave a cry of alarm. "The moon has disappeared!" he gasped, peering desperately through the window at the smoky sky, for the moon, which had earlier been shining brightly, was nowhere to be seen. The whole garden was changing color, too, flickering from pink to green to dazzling white and yellow. Beep. The family decided to look for their friends, the rock garden mice. Bravely they opened the tin door of the doll's house and looked out. They could see the red glow of the fire behind the rock garden. All their friends lived beneath the rocks except Fergus Mouse, who lived alone in a gardener's boot in the herbaceous border. They set off under the dazzling sky to see if the rock garden mice were safe. George led them swiftly across the grass and up and over the rocks by the pond until they reached the door to the hidden mouse caves. George knocked and closed his eyes, hardly daring to hope that there would still be an answer. At last the door opened very slowly, and a mouse peered out. "Oh, George, thank goodness it's you. Whatever is happening out there?" she asked. Beep. Inside the mouse burrow, the smallest mice were sitting in the shadows, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and excitement. Their parents gathered round George and Matilda and tried to decide what to do. Beep. Most of all, George was worried about the lost moon. It was so important to all the mice, who slept by day and went out at night to find their food. How could they manage without the light of the moon to guide them? And how would they be able to take the little ones safely to school? The mice did not realize that no one could see the moon that night, as smoke from the fireworks and the bonfire hung thickly in the foggy air, hiding the moon and the stars from view. They felt they must venture out again to see what had happened. George led 3 of his friends out of the burrow. They crept across the lawn. Then, as they looked up at the sky, still searching for the moon, they bumped into a wooden frame embedded in the ground. In it stood a magnificent rocket. George became very excited. He had once read about space rockets on a piece of newspaper he had found in the garbage can. Perhaps they could use this rocket to find the moon. Beep. With great excitement, George started to draw a plan of how they could turn the rocket into a space capsule. He sent his friends back to the burrow to fetch all the others and asked them to bring back some cardboard, lots of twigs, and as much string as they could find. When they returned, all the mice set busily to work. A great nibbling began as the cardboard was shaped into rings to make floors for the space capsule. Then twigs were bent round and lashed together with the string to make a sort of cage for the mice to stand in and hold on to. Finally, all the mice helped to hoist the completed capsule into the air and lower it gently over the rocket, where it was held in place by the long pieces of string looped securely over the rocket's nose cone. Beep. The end result was a magnificent space-worthy rocket. There was room for 16 mice in the capsule, and George and Matilda had a special lookout place at the top. The children would stay with Lobelia, grandmother mouse, because they were too young for such a dangerous adventure. Fergus Mouse helped all the space travelers to climb on board. He felt too old to travel with them, but wanted to join in the adventure. Then came the morning they had all been waiting for, the takeoff. The children wanted to help, but Fergus told them firmly that this was a job for a grown-up. He knew that there would be a big explosion when the rocket went off, so he asked Lobelia to make sure all the children stood well back, out of the way, where they wouldn't be hurt, while he lit the rocket. He rubbed the sticks together to make a spark. Then he lit the fuse very carefully using a long taper and ran away quickly. Beep. The mice cheered and waved to their friends inside the rocket. There was a sputter and a great fizzing noise, and then, with a whoosh of power and flame and golden stars, the brave little mice were thrust up into the air. Inside their space capsule, the mice were having the time of their lives. As the rocket shot through the sky, they knew that no mouse had ever traveled so fast before. Then, all of a sudden, George heard a tearing noise above him. The string which was holding the capsule to the rocket was being ripped away by the force of the takeoff. Before he had time to shout, "Look out!" the string gave away completely, and the space capsule tumbled out of the sky. The mice somersaulted over each other inside the capsule until they landed with a thud on the roof of the house overlooking the garden, and came to a rest in the gutter. Beep. No one was hurt but poor George. He watched in despair as the rocket streaked up into the sky without them. Then, as the rocket soared higher and higher, he started to laugh and called to the others to look up. The fog had cleared a little, and now they could see the moon smiling down at them, perfectly safe after all. The mice climbed out of the space capsule and squelched along the muddy gutter. They were far too high up to jump down to the garden, so they knotted the string from the capsule together and dangled it down inside the first drain pipe they came to. Now they had a long rope which they could use to reach the ground. Matilda slid down first and discovered that the rope was not quite long enough. Beep. She fell with a bump onto the bars of the grating at the bottom of the drain pipe, and balancing there, caught each of her friends one at a time so that they did not fall into the water in the drain below. All the mice had come down safely except for George. Then disaster struck. As he landed, he accidentally knocked Matilda over. With a little cry, she disappeared into the deep, dark, dirty water. George divided and searched everywhere. He dived and searched everywhere, but he could not find her. He dived again and again, but it was no good. The little group of mice waited and hoped, but at last, when they knew she had gone, they began to walk sadly home. Desperately, George peered into the water one last time before following his friends with tears pouring down his whiskers. Beep. Suddenly there came a shout from the front of the line of mice. They were passing another grating, and someone saw a flash of white. It was Matilda's headscarf, and she was still inside it. In a moment they surrounded the grating, reaching down to pull up a very bedraggled Matilda who had been washed through the drain under the ground. George joyfully carried Matilda home with the others dancing along beside him. As they went, they decided to prepare a surprise Thanksgiving party for her when they got home. Now that they had found both Matilda and the moon, a big celebration was called for. Beep. When he heard the news, Fergus brought out some special candles while the others prepared a wonderful banquet. When Matilda awoke at last, she saw the magical burrow lit by the candles and filled with her happy feasting friends. The door to the rock garden was left open so that the moon looked down on them as they danced all night in her light. When dawn came, they closed the door and slept, dreaming of their wonderful rocket, still traveling upwards somewhere in the sky and wondering if it would ever return.